Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Ahead of Lewis Hamilton's arrival to Ferrari for next season, Ferrari have restructured their entire technical department with the plan to put former Mercedes man in charge. They're not getting Adrian Newey as they initially thought they may do over the last couple of months. It seems he's going to go to Aston Martin instead. That means that Loic Serra is going to be the man to seemingly lead up Ferrari's project. Is he the man to put them back to the top of Formula 1? Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments below. Much else to discuss today. Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Before you ask where I am, by the way, real quick, I'll just let you know, I'm currently in Riyadh at the Esports World Cup in Saudi Arabia for a Call of Duty event over the coming days. I've got a sensational little office set up here, so a few of the videos over the coming days will probably be from exactly here. Let's go full screen though as normal because we have plenty to dive into. Firstly, Porsche. We know that they were trying to come into F1 alongside, of course, Red Bull. That never happened. We believe because Christian Horner was not so happy with the idea that Porsche effectively wanted to take like 50% control of the organisation, and they said no to that. Maybe Helmut Marko was involved as well. We don't really know the answer, but Porsche have now decided, you know what, that chapter is now closed. Instead, Red Bull effectively got into bed with Ford, and that's now their partnership going forward. Is that going to be as successful as a potential partnership deal could have, or Porsche deal could have been? Is that, loss for Formula 1? Sure, on some level. They're still getting Honda, of course, coming back. They're still getting Audi coming in, but no Porsche, of course, as we understand. Speaking of Domenicali as well, Domenicali, I can't help but say that. It's too funny. He wants to get rid of free practice sessions. That's the latest intention. And I get it, right, because there's more money involved. Let's be real, as much as I'm not the biggest fan of sprint races, more people will watch a sprint race than they will watch a free practice 3 session. It is just what it is. So there is even a feeling of, what if we just get rid of it? And to be fair, the drivers, the teams will disagree. The teams will say, we want more practice, obviously. The drivers, though, will probably tell you they're quite happy with like 1 or 2 practice sessions. They don't need forever to go around the track in a car. Like, they know these tracks mostly, apart from drivers that are new to them. So I don't necessarily hate this idea. The problem is for me is that if we get rid of free practice, what does that mean? That probably equates to more sprint races, doesn't it? Let's be real. That's probably the plan. So, yeah, his feeling is let's make the racing and the weekends more exciting by getting rid of free practice. And maybe he's onto something on some level, because the fewer free practice sessions you have, the less simulation time, the less time to collect data, the more likely it is you'll get a more entertaining outcome, I suppose, or a more unpredictable outcome, which is potentially entertaining. So I don't actually hate it, but I just think if you are going to get rid of a lot of free practice, then what does the weekend look like? Because the weekend probably looks more like a sprint race weekend. Otherwise, what are you going to do with the rest of the time? And I don't really know if I want 24 sprint races a year. Let's talk about the driver market. Valtteri Bottas is not exactly convinced that he's going to get a drive in the sport again. He says it's a complicated situation. There's other candidates that, of course, Audi will be looking at, and as it stands, that's really Bottas's only chance to get back on the grid. His teammate Zhou Guanyu looks like he will be off the grid. I know that even Zhou said he will consider basically being a reserve for a year in order to try and get back into the sport. I don't know if that's necessarily the way to go. He did say some interesting quotes, though, on the fact that he feels like as a Chinese driver, he doesn't get the kind of respect maybe that he deserves. There's talk about that Ollie Behrman is getting a lot of credit. To be fair, Behrman has kind of earned that on some level because of when he hopped into Sainz's car last minute back at Jeddah this year. But, and you can also argue the other way for Zhou, that if he wasn't a Chinese driver with that kind of backing of that input, then would he have had the last 3 years that he has done? It kind of goes both ways in this one, but I thought it was interesting nonetheless. There's also talk about Sainz. He signs the Williams deal. The problem for Sainz is, though, that it's not guaranteed at all that that car is actually going to be any good, right? There is a feeling that effectively they're going to look to write off next year's season on some level, and Williams are really looking for 2026, 2027 to turn it around. So I hope we don't get a Haas 2021 part 2, because, we know full well that was not a good season for us in 2021. The least talked about it, the better. So Williams will probably have, hopefully they at least have something solid next year, because if it is an absolute disaster, it doesn't really reflect well on anyone. This as well was from Yuki Tsunoda today. Seemingly a change of tactic on the way that he's going about trying to get this Red Bull seat, because Christian Horner does not seem convinced that it's the way to go. As we full well know, they just won't give him the seat for whatever reason. And Yuki is sitting here now saying that I'm ready to put up a fight, including against Max. I think we even saw this a couple of rounds ago when Max was kind of fighting through the field and stuff, and Yuki was not exactly letting him by into, I think it was the bus stop chicane, wasn't it, at Spa, whereas maybe he would have done a couple of years ago. I don't know. There's an argument that if you play the team game at RB, the sister team of Red Bull, you're going to get in the good books, as it were. But clearly what Yuki's been doing for the last few years, he's not necessarily been doing this, right? But his strategy as it stands to get the attention of Red Bull hasn't really worked. They're not putting him in the seat. So at this point, it's like, well, why not talk about the fact that you're trying to fight Max, and, he's ready to fight against Max and, do as well as he possibly can, including potentially in the same car. That might not necessarily make Christian Horner so happy, but it's not like Yuki's getting that promotion anyway, right? That's the understanding. So why not? And maybe it shows other teams that, hey, he is a man with, the dog within compared to some other drivers. So interesting quote, I thought, and maybe slight change of tactic there. Verstappen was also talking about Hadjar, a driver that's done pretty well and is a promising position, shall we say, in Formula 2 this season, winning the championship, potentially going to win the entire championship. And as a result of that, what does that mean for Red Bull? I think it puts more pressure, if anything, on Sergio Perez, because we know, of course, that Liam Lawson is probably getting that RB drive at some point. That would likely mean that Ricciardo goes to Red Bull, Perez is gone. But if Hadjar is also putting pressure on trying to get a drive in F1, then that puts the position of Perez under potentially even more scrutiny. Let's talk, though, about the various teams, because Aston Martin, they've got their new wind tunnel, and there have been various things over the last couple of years, really, that they've developed that have given them the ability to reach out to a guy like Adrian Newey, to reach out potentially to a guy like Max Verstappen and say, hey, we are going to sign you, and this is what we're going to do. And apparently, especially after the Newey signing, they were effectively willing to do anything it takes to make the Max Verstappen deal happen, right? We know that Verstappen will at the very least be considering his situation with Red Bull, what that means. Of course, we've talked about Mercedes, but there are now a fair few reasons why Max might at least consider the Red Bull to Aston Martin opportunity, not least because we're pretty sure that Newey's joining now. We heard this a few days ago, 100 million over 4 years. We're now hearing 100 million over 3 years. So, bang a deal, of course, for Newey. And maybe Ferrari could have put up the same money. I think this is rumoured to be at least double what he's making at Red Bull, probably more than that. I think maybe Ferrari could have done the same, but Ferrari apparently basically got cold feet on the idea because Newey came into Vasseur and said, hey, if you're going to sign me, you're going to give me veto over changes to the technical department. You're going to allow me to make a lot of decisions as if I'm the team principal. And Vasseur didn't want to do that. And, that's understandable from Vasseur and Ferrari's perspective, but also it's understandable what Newey wanted to have control over because he feels like Ferrari are not an outfit capable of winning right now. And, well, at least that's my feeling on if that rumour is true. But all the reports today are saying that, yeah, this deal is basically now done, or at least, rumours to that effect. Ferrari are not expected to sign him. They're out of the race, and Newey's probably going to Aston Martin. Of course, we talked about that and the implications of that the other day. My question is, what does it now mean for Ferrari? Because there was a feeling they're signing Lewis Hamilton. They're probably going to go out and try and sign Adrian Newey. That seemed to be close to a done deal. There were numerous reports that Ferrari had basically signed Newey, or there was a handshake deal in place. It was just a matter of getting the final signature. But that's not happened for various reasons. We're not fully sure of the answers to that, but it's not happened, at least as of now, unless things drastically change. So Ferrari now have to go down a different route. And Leclerc does say they've made progress with their car. Yes, they've, basically the bouncing has masked their improvements. But of course, if you're going to make improvements on some areas, but you have one major issue holding yourself back, have you really made that many improvements? If that's a change that has also been introduced by the upgrades. So Ferrari have fallen back, we know that, and even Mercedes are saying that their number one plan pretty much from now to the end of the season is to try and ensure they finish above Ferrari in both championships, constructors and drivers. But this is the big rumour today on what Ferrari are actually going to be up to, because Enrico Cardile has left Ferrari and he's going to join Aston Martin. So again, another indication Aston are making a major recruitment drive and it's not due to stop anytime soon. But the same is true for Ferrari. Loic Serra, who joined alongside Jerome D'Ambrosio from Mercedes not that long ago, a man who was instrumental in Mercedes' development over the last few years, certainly towards the end of their period of domination, and also a man that apparently was very close with Lewis Hamilton in terms of their feeling around the zero-pod concept and the way the car was being designed over 22-23. The rumour was that Serra and Hamilton were very aligned on the problems with the car, and, well, Mike Elliott's technical team took a different direction. That was part of the reason why Serra decided to leave in the first place. He is apparently now going to get promoted to the seat left by Enrico Cardile. So that's the rumour that Serra will be the technical director, kind of like how Pierre Wache is over at Red Bull, and he's the man that does the top job over there in some sense. But of course, Adrian Newey we're pretty sure that the super consultant, the puppet master behind the scenes in that camp. puppet master, not really in the traditional sense, because everyone knew that Newey was doing the job, but Serra will be in Wache's role effectively. And there's other changes to the structure as well, but that's the rumour that Loic Serra is going to be the new technical director of Ferrari, and I think this makes a lot of sense. The relationship that he has with Hamilton from their time, I think he was really promoted to the top job on the chassis side back at Mercedes in around about 2019. Of course, they then won a fair bit from then onwards. So big changes there at Ferrari, and also potentially confirming Newey's not going to be joining on some level. I mean, not really, because I don't think Newey was ever going to be quite the technical director. He would come in a similar consultant level role that he was doing at Red Bull before. But look, if they were still to get Newey, that's a great addition. But clearly, Vasseur has confidence that Loic Serra is the man to lead up their technical department, and I think it's a needed change, frankly. Clearly what Ferrari have done over the last few years, the last decade and a half, hasn't really worked. The politics have got in the way. And on some level, maybe the politics are getting in the way again when it comes to the fact that Newey is not joining because of whatever Vasseur thinks on the situation. But it's going to be a fascinating season next year at Ferrari, and certainly in 2026. Even Charles Leclerc says it, that having the 7-time world champion Hamilton joining is good news. It'll be interesting because I'll be able to learn from one of the best drivers in the history of Formula 1, and it's very motivating because I'm intrigued by the comparison with Lewis in the same car. And look, he isn't the only one that's intrigued by the comparison between himself and Hamilton. In race pace, it's going to be fascinating, but qualifying is what I'm really looking forward to be fair. We know that Hamilton has had his struggles this year. There's been talk about the tyres and him adapting now, and he's kind of got the hang of it more over the last couple of rounds to understand where to go. And, but Charles Leclerc is known for good reason as one of the fastest qualifiers in the history of the sport, and Hamilton has the most pole positions in the history of the sport. So, and that's going to be, because Leclerc also isn't a slow driver. So if Hamilton qualifies behind Leclerc consistently, then how often is Hamilton going to finish ahead of him in a Grand Prix? Depends to some degree on who's more comfortable with the car, but Hamilton will be happy about the idea that Serra is going to be the man in charge, and he's the man that's known Hamilton for a fair few years. So if that car is going to be designed for anyone in 2020, let's say 6 and beyond, you'd think that some of the characteristics would likely be favouring Lewis Hamilton over maybe what Charles Leclerc wants, because it's difficult to say who's the number one in a Hamilton-Leclerc duo situation, but given the keys that they've given to Hamilton on some level, the importance they feel like he has in the team to lead them back to where they're trying to be, on some level, I think, yes, he's going to be the key player, and therefore maybe on some level the number one driver. Like, I think, for all that Charles Leclerc has done for Ferrari, on some level Hamilton will be the number one until he probably retires, unless Leclerc is performing significantly better, in which case the faster driver automatically kind of becomes the number one. Speaking of Leclerc, of course, there have been one season in 2022 when he was behind Verstappen at the middle season break, the summer break, and look, his gap Verstappen is not as great as it was in either of the last two seasons, but it's not like he's going to continue to run away with it on current evidence. Of course, we know that, Norris should close up, but he should have closed up for several rounds, and it hasn't necessarily happened yet. Speaking of Mercedes and their next year's car, I thought this is interesting because obviously Mercedes want to fight at the front. I mean, like, they want to win the championship. That's kind of a no-brainer. But he does say, Andrew Chauvelin, there will be significant changes, though, to next year's car, as in there's clearly multiple ways they think they can make next year's car better, but they don't want to change the architecture because they're pretty happy with the way this car is. They even said, Andrew Chauvelin, that the 2024 car, with the knowledge they now have, they could probably make zero pods work, is what he thinks. He reckons if they started 2022 with where they are now, they could well have actually made the zero pod design work. But look, they're not going to do it. And all along, to be fair, Mercedes was saying it's not about the zero pods. There's more to it than that. It's other factors at play, the suspension, the floor, etc., that we need to figure out on the car. And once they've done that, they're in a good spot. But would this current car work with the zero pods? You've got to design, like, it's such a drastic thing they did with the zero pod concept. Have to repackage so much differently, so many of the inside parts of the car. So it makes sense why they decided to go away from it. But it was, of course, kind of a sad day in a way when they did, because it kind of proved that there was one direction to go, and that phenomenal idea when it first came on the scene back at Bahrain testing 2022 never really went anywhere. But Chauvelin says, look, other teams, you're free to try. It works if you have the base understanding. That's what Mercedes think, but I don't think that's going to be enough for them to try it next year, because it's just too much to change on the car, even if they think it could have an advantage in terms of peak downforce, as they clearly did, because otherwise they wouldn't have done it when they came up with the idea back in 2022. Their main target, by the way, they say here in the article, is they want to be third in both championships. I think their feeling is that probably Red Bull are too far away, McLaren are too far away in the constructors, but they can definitely beat Ferrari. In the drivers, it is a bit more of a challenge, right? Because Hamilton's at, 150 or so, and Leclerc is quite a way up the road. But it is definitely possible for them to do so. It's interesting that that's Mercedes' main target. They're not, but, let's be honest, the championships are out of reach in terms of winning them. So this is probably a reasonable target, all things considered. And just before we close out the video here, driver rankings, continuing on from racefans.net. 11th went to Fernando Alonso, who has been better than Stroll, but he's not been as good this season, right? Obviously, at the start of last year, he was one of the absolute top drivers, considered maybe number 2 at this point last season because of how well he'd done at the first part of the year, all the podiums. The car, clearly, he's not so happy with this year. The car also isn't as good. That always drags you down to some degree. But, Alonso's just not been at his best this season so far. I think the frustrations are probably setting in on some level with not having the car that he wanted, and probably that's going to be the case next year as well. 2026, though, with Newey in the picture and maybe Verstappen in the picture, could be a very different story. 10th goes to Esteban Ocon, who's probably been flying under the radar somewhat, marginally maybe better than Gasly. The issue, of course, is always for Ocon, clashes with teammates. We know what we saw back in Monaco and others, and now they've fired him from the team. That's one way to look at it. 9th goes to Alex Albon. I think that was really cool to see that he's getting the credit that I think he deserves. The Williams, it's tough to say because we don't really know how good it is all the time. The crash back in Australia wasn't great either, of course, and then he hopped in Logan's car and didn't quite finish in the points. 8th, though, I thought was very controversial, right? They put Hamilton in 8th place. And, I think 8th is definitely lower than I would have expected. Over the start of the season, sure, didn't have a good first few rounds, wasn't qualifying well, was struggling with the car, we all know that. But over the last couple of rounds, it's turned around massively, right? And Hamilton's won, he's the only driver apart from Verstappen to have won 2 Grand Prix. So I feel like 8th was pretty harsh. Maybe there's some recency bias in my feeling that he should be higher, but I feel like most people would say that 8th is a bit harsh for Hamilton's season, given how well he's done over the last few rounds, winning races again once the car becomes good. I mean, isn't that the whole point? But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section. But I don't imagine Hamilton minds much about this whole ranking because here he is having fun in Mozambique. So hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.